Thank you very much, Alessia. Hello, good afternoon, evening, everyone, and thank you so much for still being here on a nice Friday afternoon, evening in Paris. So I'm probably the last thing standing between you and a nice dinner or a nice journey home. No, I know there is an activity. Sorry. Yes, there's pizza. So I'm not. Okay, now I feel much better. Yeah, it's supposed to be a keynote. I'm mostly here to share my experience with you. I have been involved with citizen engagement for quite a long time now. And I'm working a bit more on the field of co-creation, social innovation, social open innovation. So I might have examples that sound a bit different from the examples that have been shared so far, but I think that you can relate to many of them, and I would be super curious to hear your thoughts about them. I'm originally from Italy, as you can guess from my name. I live in Brussels. I've been in Brussels for quite a long time, and I have been working since about 20 years in science and society in a very broad sense. I started as a journalist, then I went into research about science communication, then I ended up working in a big network involving science centers and science museums, and finally I decided to create my own company. And continue doing citizen engagement, science engagement, in a way that I heard a lot the word meaningful this morning, so I wanted to do it in a way that was meaningful to me, which doesn't mean that the rest is not meaningful, but I really wanted to try and see if I could specialize in implementing very bottom-up processes. It's probably not the best idea for creating a business. I'm never going to become very rich with it, for sure, as you can guess. But it's really exciting, nonetheless, because I can see a bit this field from also perspective of, in the end, if I want to be successful, I need to be able to sell these citizen engagement approaches to clients, so meaning cities, for example, or research centers. So I can see a bit also the business side of it, let's say, which is also very interesting. And if you like, we can talk about, I won't talk about this today, but if you're interested, we can have a chat in the following activity. When we had a talk with Alessia and with Stephanie about what to focus on in my talk today, we spent a lot of time talking about what happens even when you think you have everything under control. So it's really about, I will want to share experiences with you about what to me have been some of the biggest, in a way, unexpected things that happen in some of the citizen engagement processes I've been doing, which make me feel a bit like, well, I should have thought about this. But they were huge learning experiences for me. And it made me think a lot. Today I attended one of the sessions on the impact assessment, and it's really true, I think, that even if you try and plan things as best as you can, really trying to keep everything under control, there are a lot of things that can go a bit differently than you expected. So, of course, these challenges I'm sharing are from my point of view. Oh. Sorry, I thought you were seeing it. But I can also talk about it while we find a way to show it. But they are from my point of view as a science engagement professional. So that's what I do in my life. I don't do much research. Well, there is a research component in what I do. I really make science engagement my business and my life, basically. So that's a point of view from which I'm sharing these, these unexpected things that happened to me. So first of all, there is a lot of talking, a lot of discussions about calling things in the right way. One of the biggest challenges for me is terminology. And when I say right, I put right into brackets because there is, of course, no right way to call things. As a professional in this field, I need to adapt the way I call things. It's basically the same thing, but I need to call it in a very different way every time I go to a different client, a different institution, different persons. For example, here today, the way you are calling things, so participatory research, is something I don't use that much in my activities. So I have to be able to catch the different meanings of things and try to use the right language each time. And it gets even more complicated when you try to involve the private sector, which is something that I try to do a lot. I try really to focus on multi-stakeholder engagement. So it's about involving citizens, but it's about involving also the private sector. Facilitation to me is absolutely one of the most important secret ingredients in all these processes, and it's still very much underestimated. And I have some examples also on this. Inclusion, we have been, I think, listening to a lot of things about inclusion these days. It's a key element. Getting even close to it is really still a big challenge, as much as we try. Impact, I like to call it 50 shades of impact, because there is absolutely no way to find any agreement on what impact means, how it should be measured, how it should be implemented, which makes it also so interesting, but sometimes also very challenging. And then the last one that is for me one of the most interesting one that I have a nice example to share with you is about the fact that usually when I go and try to convince institutions to do these participatory processes, I feel a bit like an advocate of civil society. But sometimes it has happened to me that civil society actually doesn't want really to be advocated on things by me. So this has also been a challenge for me. So about terminology, these are just a few of the ways I have been calling what I do. We could spend hours and probably you would fall asleep as soon as I start talking about one of these terms. But it's really like even just, I know you probably have the same problem, but just explaining to my parents what I do is already a challenge. But explaining to my peers what I do is also a challenge. I feel like I relate mostly to co-creation, to co-design, to citizen engagement, to open innovation. And I used to relate a lot to RRI, Responsible Research and Innovation. That was a big fashion for some time, now it's gone. And now I have to relate to something called knowledge valorization, because if I want to follow some trends at a European level, I mean, this is a conference from 2 big European projects, so I'm sure that many of you also follow these trends. Now the big keywords is evolving, so now it's about knowledge valorization. So this can be really exhausting, especially when, well, a bit challenging, especially when relating to public funders, to funding agencies who tell me, we just got used to RRI and now it's changing again. Yes, it is, yeah, I know you can relate. So terminology is also part of this having to expect the unexpected, in the sense that you would think that it would not change so much, but actually it does. So to me at the moment, some of the words I'm using the most are really open innovation, co-creation, knowledge valorization. I'm working a lot in the field of missions. I don't know if you are familiar with the European Commission having set up 5 big missions to achieve by 2030. I'm working in particular with the climate neutral and smart cities mission, where, for example, none of these words, well, apart from citizen engagement, very few, and citizen science probably, very few of these words are used. It's all about partnerships. So it's yet something else. Facilitation, and here is where I'm going to start and bring you some examples. Facilitation is also something extremely important. So to me, this is really at the core of what I do. I set up the process, I use my know-how in social sciences to try and adapt and give it the best approach possible when I'm asked to implement a citizen or multi-stakeholder engagement process. And then there is the facilitation. So we work with very detailed scripts. We try to set up the process in a way that is as controlled as possible. And when we are not facilitating things ourselves directly, we actually do spend a lot of time training those who will be facilitating the processes. In the last year, I've worked on a co-creation process in the city of Gothenburg in Sweden, in a project that is called MOSAIC, which is also a EU-funded project. And this was an extremely long process. So it went on for almost a year, with involving the city officials we work with, so people working in the city on the climate transition. At a certain point, we created some groups involving different type of stakeholders, so involving citizens, involving representative of industries. For example, the city of Gothenburg has one of the biggest production of Volvo cars, so we had someone from Volvo involved. Together with citizens, we had some researchers. We worked on mobility. We tried to make the mobility in the city more sustainable. And we tried to develop together with all the stakeholders some concrete ideas, some concrete solutions. So we had this process going on for long. Every single meeting, every single session that these groups met had a specific structure and, of course, a whole process that it had to follow, until a certain point when things were going quite well. One of the group was working on a very futuristic idea of a bus that can go pick up people, but also carry things, and can be multitasking, where you can do a lot of things on this bus, etc. Except that at a certain point, I found out that the person, so one of the citizens who had brought this idea into the group, had actually patented this idea together with some friends. So I'm sure here there are a lot of people with some experience on intellectual property management. And that was quite an issue, because of course that was supposed to be a new co-creation process with a very clear Creative Commons agreement on what was going to happen to the ideas that were emerging, etc. And this person was not happy with this and did not agree to actually recognizing the other members of the group to be contributors to this idea, because they had been working for the last 5 years with some friends to patent it, and they were trying to sell it to Volvo. So this is something that can happen even when the process is really well, I think it was well facilitated. All the city and the people we worked with, they really praised the facilitation as a way to overcome some challenges, some tensions between the group. But it doesn't prevent you to, for example, spot or identify people's own agendas, which can be understandable. This person had been trying to find funding for his idea since a really long time. So he saw this co-creation process as an opportunity for him to get visibility and to eventually get funding. But at this stage, we had to take a step back. And we had to say, well, either we find an agreement on the management of the intellectual property of this, or we go back. We had already had quite a few meetings where the group had worked on this. We had to go back. In the end, the person didn't agree, so we went back and started again. And the facilitator had to do a huge job to keep people motivated. So, inclusion. So, as I mentioned, I Sweden. Okay, the picture is not super clear, but maybe you can tell me something. Is there something you notice in this group of people? Yes, thank you, the age. I mean, I'm saying this with a lot of love. These people were amazing. They stayed involved with us for 6 months, co-creating ideas. But most of the people that joined the process are retired people. Why? Because it was not possible with the city to set up any system to ameliorate this situation. So, of course, we couldn't offer compensation for the people who were coming to the activities. We didn't offer service like childcare. We tried to at least do this at hours where people could come after work, so not within our working hours. But still, it was not our choice. We had to keep up with the process, but we were not able to follow the very same guidelines. So we preach about all these things, but many times it's actually not possible to implement them. While I was in the middle of this process, I met someone from the city of Oros, which is also part of this mission, who told me that she has managed to convince some of the big companies in Oros to allow their citizens to allow their employees to take part in some participatory democracy activities within their working hours, which I found it extremely interesting. Finally, a way to have citizens also take part in participatory activities under the in a time where they are still paid, they still have a salary because everyone else is. So now I'm trying to apply the same thing in Brussels. I'm trying to talk with, for example, a big company called KPMG that you probably have heard of. They allow their employees to go and do charity work during their working hours. So why not take part in some of the citizen engagement activities that we organize? And I was also recently in a conference in Brazil, and it was really interesting because every single speaker, in every single session before they started speaking, they described themselves. So I'm a white woman, sort of blondish hair to the shoulder, I'm wearing glasses, I'm wearing a black jacket. And it was just normal. It was not that someone reminded them to do this. It's because they had people in the audience or people connected online. They could be blind, so it's now part of their common practice at conferences to do this every time a new speaker starts talking. Impact, and especially social impact. So to me, and I know we had a really interesting session today about impact. To me, it's still a bit of a black box in the sense that I work mostly with cities, so city council, regional governments, and they really struggle with what we do. They tell us, look, I'm really convinced that citizen engagement is important. I'm really convinced that multi-stakeholder engagement is important. But I need numbers. I need to be able to prove this to my politicians, to whoever makes decisions at that level. And there is absolutely no way to find an agreement between, at least I haven't managed yet, to find a way to have researchers come up in the projects we do with some indicators, numbers especially, that's what cities want, not because it's the way it works, that fulfill these needs. And I would really be interested to know if someone has. Especially when it comes to the added value. So they keep asking us what changes, what is different from doing things as usual. I know the answer. I know that because I've seen it in practice. I know that things get better when we do participatory processes, but they don't, or even if they do, they still need to, what is happening here? I don't know. They still need to prove it somehow. The understanding of the outcomes is also very tricky. There is a lot of issues in being part of the process. So I'm thinking about Gothenburg, the city that we have involved in MOSAIC. They have been very active. They have been very involved in the whole process. And to me, this was a sort of guarantee that they would understand the process and they would understand what was coming out of the process. The fact of being there, having city officials, sitting with those groups twice a month, working together for months together into coming up with these ideas, contextualizing, prototyping these ideas, to me was a sort of guarantee that they would know what to do with these ideas. It's not. Basically, they saw these ideas as something that they had already thought of. One of the ideas was, for example, to develop a mobility hub. So be able to do things more locally at a neighborhood level where people could bring maybe go until they're by car, leave by car there, their car or their bike, whatever, and then maybe work there. They said, for example, maybe companies could have detached offices all over the city, so I don't have to drive all the way up to my office. I can just work here. Maybe I can do some activities here, some more community activities, etc. And the agency that is in charge of mobility in the city said, well, of course, we already thought of mobility hubs, but it doesn't work. Well, another idea that the citizens came, when I say citizens, it's not correct because these groups were really composed by a lot of different type of stakeholders. Another idea that came up was about, I loved how they call it, a social carpooling. So it's about car sharing, as basic as it is, but with a social component. So for example, they were saying, well, the same app that allows me to understand how I can share a car with someone to go to work could actually tell me if I could share the car with people with my same taste or working in my same field. So it would allow me maybe to find a job, to find a better job, or to network, or to find a wife or a husband, to maybe meet someone interesting. So I love the fact that they called it social carpooling. But the city actually didn't, they said, well, but car sharing already exists in this city. So what's so interesting about these ideas? And then I thought, okay, that's really my fault. I should have, now I need to be there also in the interpretation of these ideas. It's not, to me it was obvious that there was a social component in all these ideas, that it's what can make these ideas work. Like just the pure implementation of them without considering the social element will probably not work or has already failed in the city. But this social component that these type of processes bring in is something that they have never thought of, and it's something that they were not able to recognize in these ideas. So to me, it's also the understanding of the outcomes, a big part of the impact process, to be able that it's not, to make sure that it's not just a process on its sake. And finally, the struggle for interest, and I call it legitimacy. And this to me is a really interesting example that I had, that was in 2022, where I worked in the city of Brussels on the field of unsold food. So unsold food is all the food that for some reasons is thrown away by supermarket, by restaurants, because it gets to the expiry date, etc. So imagine that you are faced with the possibility of supporting an innovation that fits many boxes. So it's really good for the environment because it's going to be a system through some vans that goes and picks up unsold foods in supermarket and redistributes it by selling it at half the price in different locations in the city through an app. So of course, in terms of environment, circular economy, etc., is going to be really interesting. There is an economic value to it, so people have access to food at half the price. They maybe have more money if they spend less on food. They maybe have more money to spend on other things, such as, for example, their health, etc., their living costs, etc., etc. There is a social component to it because this idea, this app that is presented to you, is going to redistribute to local associations all the food that is not sold through this app. And there is also a genius side to it, because this idea is developed by some students who have studied economy, so they have actually thought on a very careful business plan to make it work. Would you finance it or would you support it? Raise your hand if you would. Yes, good. Well, if you did, you probably would have now a service that is called Happy Hours Market, which actually exists in Brussels. It's been created by two relatively young guys that have studied economy in a very prestigious university in Brussels. And they have now this system in place. Except that Brussels already has tons of associations who already handle this unsold food. They struggle. They have hundreds of voluntary people working in these associations who every day go with very old vans, broken cars, etc., to pick up food in supermarkets, etc., and they distribute it for free to people in need. And when this innovation appeared, this association got really, 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 really mad. To the point where they declare war to this innovation. They went to the ministry, they went to the fiscal department, they tried to shut it down. And when I'm saying shutting down, I'm not exaggerating. It was war to stop it. Why? Because their work, what they do, is absolutely not acknowledged and very poorly funded from the public sector. So what we did was a series of participatory activities to try and understand, to find what I call a common ground in this very complex situation. We said very clearly we were not mediating, but we were trying to find a way to move forward. And what was very interesting is that we involved in this process, we talked separately about with the different stakeholders, but we also involved the users of both the local associations, so those people who go and pick up food for free, and those people who buy the food at half the price on the app. And it was really interesting to hear them say that they would not, the people buying the food on the app, they would not be able to buy food like meat or fish every week if it wasn't because of this half price that they get on this app. But at the same time, they would never go to the local associations because they don't want to be, they don't feel like they are poor, and they don't want to steal food from the poor. So we then tried to do a final activity where we brought everyone together. And this was, to me, one of the most interesting workshops I have ever done in my life. First of all, because the local associations did not let the users speak. The local association acted as those who know what is important, know what is needed, and the ones that were the only one to have the legitimacy to give food to the, they were saying in French, les gens dans les vrais besoins, this thing of the real need. It was like a scale of need. We are feeding the people in the real need, the rest, well, let's find something else, but don't touch our unsold food, because now that this app exists, we don't have access to this unsold food anymore. To me, this has been one of the biggest learning experiences I have had recently, to the point where a big local foundation in Belgium had decided to finance. This was in the context of a European project, and the big local association had decided to finance the next steps, but also decided to give some funding to these local associations to support the work they do. And as soon as this local association got this funding, they stopped the process. They said, well, now we have money, we have quite a good funding to keep going. We don't want to be involved. Now, at the moment where the common ground was found, everyone was advocating for the public sector to take a role, take a stake in this situation. As soon as the money came in, everything stopped. They stopped this foundation from financing the next step of the participatory activities. So, I'm going to stop because I'm way behind my time, but I had just written a few takeaways a bit in a provocative way. Don't take me too seriously. It's almost 6 p.m. on a Friday, so if I could do things differently, and I will for sure in the future based on my experiences, in a way, I would say this is very provocative. I wrote it on purpose to expect civil society organization to have different priorities than researchers, innovators. I was hearing the same things that sometimes I hear from researchers. We know what to do. We are the one who know who have the knowledge, and also we need funding. We need money, basically, which I totally understand and respect. Please don't take me wrong. Expect policymakers to mobilize citizens. It's really difficult for cities to bring citizens. They always have to get the help of local associations, and that's very difficult. But also to know how to handle citizen engagement outcomes, as I mentioned before. And and also expect clear measurements to quantify social aspects of the activities I run, except for learning outcomes. The learning aspect is always very clear, but the other sides is sometimes a bit, well, I find it quite challenging. And I'm happy to hear your thoughts and take questions on this.
Thank you so much for sharing your wonderful experiences and giving us such a rich insight. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the IPR issues, because that is something that is kind of super nice ground for conflict, and I feel it's so hard to find solutions there. And how did you approach this, and what solution was found together, you know? Can you maybe also show the slide once more? Thank you.
It's called Landvegon, this idea that they have patented. So in this case, the solution was relatively easy in the sense that all the participants had signed a clear, not only a consent form, but also a definition of how the IP management would be for the ideas that emerged from the process. So it was clearly stated that the ideas would belong to the creators of those ideas. So in a way, this person had to be, he had signed this paper as everyone else in the group, so I had to be a bit the bad cop. It was really hard because it was someone he's someone really motivated and in good faith. But I had to tell him, look, either you open up this idea to the idea that everyone else that is in this group is recognized as contributor as well, or we cannot move forward with it. In the case of, we had another pilot city in Milan, in MOSAIC, which is Milan. And Milan, for example, had already had a relatively challenging experience with, Milan worked on with the air quality and data related to air quality. And there had been already some appropriations in the past of the data around air quality to try and make it into a business opportunity. So the same pilot done in Milan had a completely different IP management regulation that was set up, and the city told very clearly to the participants that the property of the ideas could not be with anyone except the city itself. So the city kept the ownership of the ideas that were co-developed, of course, with the aim of making them into something that is useful and good for the citizens living in the city. So it really depends, to me, it really depends on the context, on the situation. There are so many ways to, and everyone agreed. For example, in Milan, no one was upset by this option. And even with this, they still had private sector companies involved in the process, so it didn't stop the private sector from participating. And if you want to know more about this, you can come on the 21st of tiny promotional moment. You can come on the 21st of November in Brussels. We are going to host our final conference, and all cities that have been experimenting with this co-creation process will be sharing their experience and showing how they are making use of the ideas that have emerged from the process and interpreting them.
I was curious about the facilitation time, because you use the term, you need to have a precise script. So I was wondering if this precise script that you prepare beforehand with a lot of thinking, I guess, you explain it always and very precisely to the participants. Because I'm thinking about this situation where maybe a group can be okay to enter a process of participatory thinking, but often they can tell something like, yes, but please don't do this I don't bear using Post-it, or I don't understand what does it means for us in this process. So how far you go in explaining the why you chosen that way of facilitating?
Yeah, so yes, we have been transparent from the start in saying how the process would be, how long it would take, what it would entail, what would be the steps. And at each session, the facilitator would explain what would happen during the session. When I say strict, maybe it's a bit too much, in the sense that we did have some script to follow in each activity for the facilitator. But we always told them to be open to adapt to the process and to what was happening. So in some cases, the facilitators are, it happened to me also in case I am the facilitator, we leave possibilities for adaptation. When I say a detailed scripting, it's not so much in the tools, let's say. So if someone doesn't want to use flip chart or Post-its, it can be done other ways. We went to a living lab at a certain point for the prototyping. Everyone loved it. But it's mostly on what we want to reach by the end of the meeting. So the specificities of how it happens can be adapted, and were adapted each time. They had to be adapted. We had in particular one participant that was questioning every single step of what we were doing. So there were.
And so first of all, we come from a funding, and so first of all, we come from a funding background where we fund a lot of in the field of care, and actually I could relate quite a lot to this tension you brought up between, in our instance, welfare institutions, and then on the other end, the social innovation, social entrepreneurship scene, like wanting to do innovations in a field where existing institutions really have like profound experience and do the groundwork. So actually, I would, and excuse me, but I actually have a lot of sympathy for the existing institutions, for working in that field all these years, and the kind of knowledge they brought up. And would like to ask you to elaborate a little bit more about what you wanted to say with this use case, and what would you expect from the local institution to behave like, because it sounded a little bit like you would accuse them of leaving the process or something like that. And I would simply would be interested in what you would suggest, or what you think would be the more appropriate way to act, and in particular then maybe also how moderators of such processes can like motivate people, or
Yeah, that's a really good question. So maybe what I went fast, but basically the reason why we did this participatory, so we jumped into this situation where a lot of things had already happened. So let's say the mess was already ongoing. And the reason why we did this process, we did these participatory workshops with some of the stakeholders involved in all this, was because we were actually trying to suggest to the funding agencies a way to implement very simple, very short, very agile participatory processes, which could actually allow to avoid this kind of situation. So basically, we tried to show how a few very simple workshops. So we basically invited all the public agencies who deal with unsold food somehow, whether it's with food or innovation, research, poverty, etc. And we had them sit around the table for 3 hours. We had a workshop with some of the users of these apps, and these because there were already apps that existed in this field. So some users of these associations and these apps, We talked with a few researchers, we talked with the private sector, so those who generate this unsold food. And then we very quickly identified some, what I call this common ground that I mentioned before. So I do believe that if the agency that funded this innovation, for example, this innovation was extremely successful, got a lot of good funding, not only from public agencies. But if this agency that funded this innovation had the possibility to introduce a tiny bit of interactions with some of the stakeholders in the field, with some of the actors in the field, with some of the end users of this innovation, it would have been very easy to very quickly spot the issues that came up. And to make, I'm not saying this innovation is great, and it's great that it exists, because it touches a target audience that is in real need, to me, as much as the real need of the other associations. So I'm not saying that the innovation should not have existed, but obliging these two great guys who came up with it to have some interactions with other stakeholders. So not just think about the business model, for example, which is what was most interesting to the region at the moment. They kept saying, well, many of the innovation we fund, they die when the funding is over. This was a great innovation because it looked like something that could go on after the funding was over, which is a great criteria, I understand. But introducing maybe some other criteria, or asking this guy to spend 10 hours, giving maybe a little seed funding, for example, for this guy to interact with other stakeholders and their future users and users of other things that do similar things before they go to the market, I think would have had a huge impact on how things went. I know it's difficult for funding agencies to do this. This also was the answer that we got from Brussels. But I think these kind of situations happen and will happen more and more because there is a strong push for innovation to solve all the problems, whether it's climate, whether it's health. And the more and more of these type of innovations appear, the more there will be these clashes that could be avoided by doing participatory activities, doing this participatory approach from the start. I don't know if it answers your question. And it takes, I swear that it's something that takes not so long and not that much money. It's something that can be done in maybe 3 or 4 months. It's possible to get a clear understanding of what could be the impact.
Thank you very much, Marzia. You can